Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn. Today's video is the very last day of spoiler season for Bloomburrow. We have a ton of cards to go over. This is the grand finale, so to speak. And we do have a clearer picture of what the set looks like now that we've seen all the cards, what limited is going for, and in what ways it might impact standard as we move into rotation, a brand new standard format. Thank goodness, it's been long enough. Very excited for that. Before we dive in, make sure you like the video if you haven't already, because it's you guys liking the video every single time that has allowed this channel to grow so quickly. Screaming right past 10,000 subscribers. That's all thanks to you guys. Every single like does help this video get pushed out to so many more people. The YouTube algorithm is a hell of a thing, and every like does make a difference. So thank you guys to those that do it. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an upload. Lots of crazy spoiler content coming. I still have the special guests and the commander cards. Those are going to be two separate videos that I do later on, but this will be the last video for the base set, the stuff that you can draft with, the stuff that will be in standard. So really excited to just dive right in. So let's do it. One last thing. Early access is happening on Wednesday, July 24th. I'm going to have a 24-hour stream, a marathon stream. It's going to be kind of crazy. Hopefully I don't fall asleep. I'll have to have plenty of nectar of the gods on tap for that one. But make sure you join me for that. That's twitch.tv/quarantinecapricorn, because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming. Now let's get into these cards. We're going to start by taking a very brief look at some of the tokens that they've released and what these tokens are going to look like. Pretty cool. This is the Otter token that has prowess. And then we see the Rabbit token. And then we also have a token here for Cragflame, which is the equipment that's made by Mabel, if I remember correctly. And then we have a few tokens here for some of the Offspring cards. If you remember, the Offspring ability lets you pay a certain amount of mana as you cast the thing to make a token copy of the thing. In this case, it's Manifold Mouse, a 1/1 at the beginning of combat on your turn. Target mouse you control gains your choice of Double Strike or Trample until end of turn. It's cool that it notes the token's mana cost, because it is technically a copy of the Manifold Mouse and will have the same mana cost, although it doesn't put that mana cost up at the top right so that you don't confuse it as the actual Manifold Mouse and, you know, accidentally keep it in your deck and draw it and try to cast it, which would be bad. We see another copy here of Tender Wild Guide. Really cool token, 1/1 token creature Possum Druid, taps for a mana of any color, and can tap to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And then one last one for Coruscation Mage here, which is a 1/1 that whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So really cool to see these tokens, especially considering the fact that these Offspring cards are actually making tokens that are way more important, way more prominent than tokens ever have been. So cool to see tokens for that and get confirmation that each of those Offspring cards is going to get an actual token associated with it. But first up, we've got Jolly Gerbils. 1 white and 1 for a 2/3 hamster citizen. And whenever you gift a card, you draw a card. This is huge. If you're playing a lot of gift cards that are going to be able to gift opponents anything, you just get to draw a card. And in fact, it triggers off of any gift given, not just if you let them draw a card. So when I first went into looking at this card, I was thinking like, okay, every time you let them draw a card by giving them the gift of a card, you get to draw a card too. So now it's kind of like the gift is free. It's not completely free, right? Because you're both drawing into more things. But if you're playing in a deck that has more value than your normal standard deck, you're going to probably draw into more value than your opponent, which makes it even better. But even just being able to draw a card to keep pace with the opponent when you let them draw a card is going to be really good, because a lot of times what you're getting by gifting them a card is going to be substantial. So this guy really makes me think that there will be a gift-centered deck, possibly standard, possibly even viable in standard, right? Possibly powerful enough to make the cut in that format. I'm really interested in trying to brew that deck, and this card just seems really interesting. And it's especially good if you have gifts that do other things that aren't necessarily drawing a card, because if you can like gift them a tapped fish, for example, and give them just a 1/1, and not only do you get the payoff for the gift, but you also get to draw a card, That's crazy. So really interested to brew in this, and I probably will brew a standard deck that's focused on gifts with a playset of gerbils in early access, so looking forward to that. Next up we have Stalking the Pantry. 1 green for an enchantment. Whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, put a supply counter on Stalking the Pantry. You can also pay 2 and remove a supply counter to draw a card. Seems really good, right? Every single time you put a +1/+1 counter on anything, you get a supply counter, which lets you pay 2, draw a card. For every 1 supply counter, right? I think the fact that this comes down for just 1 mana is what makes it pretty good. It's obviously meant to be a way to gas up in Limited, more so than in Constructed, but it's possible this could see play in a Standard deck if the +1/+1 counter deck in Standard ends up being powerful enough and consistent enough. Cool little way to gas up, mostly for Limited though. Next up we've got Flame Cache Gecko. 1 red and 1 for a 2/2 Lizard Warlock. When it enters, if an opponent lost life this turn, you add 1 black and 1 red mana to your mana pool. You can also pay 1 red and 1, discard a card to draw a card. This is kind of crazy. This is a lot like, why am I blanking on the name? There's a 2 mana Gruul 2/2 that gives you 2 mana in Gruul when you play it. That's been in Magic forever and is a staple of a lot of older decks. Remind me in the comments what that card is called. I know the name of the card, but for some reason I'm blanking on it just in the heat of the moment. But this is kind of like a standard legal version of that. But there's a couple ways in which this is a little bit better, and a couple ways in which it's worse. With that other card, you don't have to make the opponent lose life in order to get the 2 mana. With this, you do. That being said, this only costs 1 red and a colorless, so anything that's going to reduce the cost of creatures is going to let you cast this for just 1 red mana, which essentially turns this into mana generation. You pay 1 red, not only do you get a 2/2 and your red back, but you also generate a free black mana. That sounds crazy. Also, having the discard outlet here, having the mana sink, means that even if you don't have a 2-drop in your hand to use this mana to cast, you can at least do something with the mana always, no matter what, because the floor is you have this ability to discard a card, draw a card to sink that mana into. So you're never going to be in a situation where, like, it's turn 2, you've only got 3 drops in your hand, and you're worried about playing this because you can't use the mana. This sort of makes it so you don't completely waste the mana in situations like that. So pretty cool card. Also worth noting that you can flicker it on turns where they lose life to just get free mana, and that seems kind of bananas. In this set, there's a lot of flickering, there's a lot of returning creatures to your hand to recast them with stuff like Frog Tribal, so this could be really crazy in that, in maybe some kind of a Jund brew. We're gonna have to do a lot of experimenting for sure. But next up we've got 3 Tree Root Weaver, 1 green and 1 for a 1/3 Mole Druid that taps for a mana of any color. This is a decent common that's going to fill in your 2-drop slot in Limited. It's nice that it fixes mana, it doesn't just tap for a green. It's kind of rare for commons to be able to do that, so this is going to be a really good way to ramp and color fix in your Limited deck in green, and you'll be able to pick up this probably pretty early because there's a number of decent mana dorks in this set that are better than this, that are going to get picked up earlier, that are in like the uncommon slot and stuff like that, and even some in rare. So I think this will see a lot of play, just shoring up that aspect of decks that need it. Next up we've got Caretaker's Talent. This card is nuts. 1 white and 2 for an enchantment class. Whenever 1 or more tokens you control enter, you draw a card, but it triggers only once each turn. So it's every time any token enters. It can be a creature token or a non-creature token. It can be a map token or a blood token. Whatever token, it doesn't matter. And if it enters on your turn, you'll get to draw a card, but you can also draw an additional card if you can make a token enter the battlefield on your opponent's turn. So if there's ways to do that, this card gets even better because you're drawing 2 cards every turn cycle just by making tokens. But then it levels up to level 2 for just 1 white mana, and at level 2 you get to create a token that's a copy of target token you control. So not only are you getting, you know, extra card draw whenever you're making a token, but you get to copy your best token after that for just 1 mana, which in the right deck with something like Thousand Moon Smithy, stuff like that, you can copy very substantial tokens. It's also worth noting that the default for this isn't necessarily going to be like, oh, I get to make a copy of a 1/1, yay. Because you got to remember, this set has a focus on the offspring ability, which lets you create tokens that are very relevant, that keep all of the abilities of the creature they're tokens of. So the token quality in this set is way higher than what it normally would be. So when you look at an ability like this and you think, oh, I get to make a token of, a copy of a token I have, it's more powerful than what you're used to that ability being. So it's easy to get in the mindset of thinking that this isn't as good as it actually is. It's always going to be a crappy 1/1 unless you happen to play Thousand Moon Smithy or something like that. I feel like you go into this set with that mentality, but really, because the offspring mechanic is so abundant, I think the consistency of getting a token that's actually way more relevant than just a crappy throwaway 1/1 is going to be a lot higher, and that makes this card way better than it seems on initial inspection. But we haven't even got to level 3. You can pay 1 white and 3 to level it up to level 3, and at that point, all creature tokens you control get a double Anthem effect, +2/+2, and that's just crazy. And you don't have to worry about turning that on quickly, right? You can just do all the normal stuff your deck's trying to do first, and then eventually, when you're out of gas, just dump your mana into level 3, buff up your whole board, and go ham. So everything about this card I kind of love, and Token Tribal absolutely needs to be some kind of a brew during early access. I'm going to get to work on it for sure. But next up we have a Gateblade Assassin. 1 black and 1 for a 1/3 Lizard Assassin. When it attacks, defending player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I kind of love this in the common slot. Fits into Lizard Tribal, it's an assassin, so potentially it might make the cut in standard for Outlaws. Probably not, but it's possible. Just getting to drain a life on attacks with something that has a 3 toughness as a 2-drop is kind of decent. Better than I would expect for a common. It's not going to light the world on fire, you're not going to first pick it, but it's definitely a decent inclusion to help fill out your curve on Lizard decks, and just help end the game that much sooner. Next up we have High Stride. 1 green for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+3 and gains reach until end of turn. And you untap it. So nice little common piece of, combat trick here to maybe blow out the opponent, kill your opponent's thing, buff up your dude in the process, maybe block with something they didn't expect you to block because you get to untap it, that sort of thing. So you can also do it on the attacks, wait for them to block. Not only does your guy get buffed, but it also untaps so that it's a blocker when your opponent tries to crack back the next turn. So it's a nice, cool little trick. It's not going to light the world on fire, you're not going to first pick it or anything. It's going to be your 22nd, 23rd card, but if you really need combat tricks or you're low on removal, you can slot this in and it'll be a pretty decent inclusion. Next up we have Roughshod Duo, another one of the duos that is 2 creature types, which there is an entire cycle of commons that do that. This is a 3/2 Mouse Raccoon with Trample for 1 red and 2, and whenever you expend 4, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and Trample until end of turn. So pretty cool card. It can buff itself, although it won't gain the Trample since it already has Trample. But it's really easy to hit those expend 4s. You're just doing what you would normally do and playing cards you would normally play, and anytime you play 4 mana worth of stuff or more, you'll just get to hand out the +1/+1 and Trample. So it's not completely useless. If it's the only creature on the board, gets even better if you have another creature on the board. So nice little filler card for limited for sure. Next up we have Psychic Whirl. 1 black and 2 for a sorcery. Target opponent discards 2 cards, and then if you control a rat, you surveil 2. So nice little bit of discard here. It gets a little bit better if you're in Rat Tribal specifically, because you get to surveil 2, get to put stuff in your graveyard that can enable some of the things you want, like Threshold or Forage, while also, basically scrying into things that you might need, while also making your opponent discard 2 cards. Under normal circumstances, I would not think a card like this is worth running in Limited, but because there's a lot of other discard cards in this set, and a lot of ways to support discard, this might actually be worth running alongside some of the discard payoffs that this set has. Not entirely sure, but it's worth experimenting with. That being said, be trepidatious about including cards like this in your limited deck, because Man, if you top deck this late in the game and your opponent doesn't have a hand, and they're running you over with what they have on the board, and you just need a way to catch up, drawing this is really bad. I guess it's not completely worthless in Rat Tribal because you get the Surveil too, but you never want to be in that situation, for sure. I'm tired. But next up, we've got Tangle Tumbler, a 6/6 artifact vehicle for just 3 mana. It has Vigilance, and you can tap 2 untapped tokens you control to make it become an artifact creature until end of turn. So it doesn't have a traditional crew cost. You have to actually tap 2 untapped tokens, which means this wants to be in the token deck, one of the token decks, whether it be rabbits or rats or whatever the case may be. But it's nice that it has another ability here. If you're in a situation where you don't have your tokens yet, you can pay 3, tap this, put a +1/+1 counter on target creatures. So it's not completely useless if you don't have your tokens yet. And even after you have your tokens, because of the Vigilance, you can swing in with this, and then at any time at instant speed, use its ability to put a counter either on itself, if, you know, it gets blocked by a 6/6 or something, or on another creature in the middle of combat as a combat trick, or just hold the ability to do that, you know, on blocks on the opponent's turn. So there's some versatility there. If you have a deck that is combining +1/+1 counter synergies with token synergies, and you have a lot of both, this card's kind of a no-brainer and will probably be a slam dunk. But next up, we have Sachets Brew. 1 red and 1 for an instant. You may gift a tapped fish as you play it, which means your opponent gets a 1/1 fish creature token before the rest of the card resolves. As an additional cost to cast this, regardless of whether you gift a tapped fish, you discard a card. Target player draws 2 cards, and if the gift was promised, target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So not only is it a standard, you know, pay 2 mana, discard a card, draw 2 like we see in every set, but if you gift them a 1/1 that's tapped, you get to buff up a dude by +2. Not awful. It's nice that you get a little bit of card advantage tacked on to some, you know, like a bit of a combat trick. Doesn't give any defense bonus or anything like that, so you're not going to be able to use this to save a creature, but you can use this to kill a creature that otherwise wouldn't die, and that might be worth giving them a 1/1 for in certain situations. It's also possible that you could use this to just win by doing 2 extra damage with a creature that got through. And having your thing that you can use for card advantage early in the game, you know, double as a way to get extra damage in late in the game is a nice little bit of versatility that makes this card a little bit better. That being said, it's not super great, right? It's one of the last cards you're going to add to your deck. But next up, we have Storm Chaser's Talent. This is another rare. 1 blue for an enchantment class. When it enters, you create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. You can pay 1 blue and 3 to level it up to level 2, and when it does, you return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. And then you can pay 1 blue and 5, level it up to level 3. When it's level 3, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. This card is amazing. I think the part that might be overlooked about it the most is it's just a pretty decent 1/1 prowess 1-drop by itself, but it's a 1/1 prowess 1-drop that triggers your prowess and triggers your other non-creature things because it's an enchantment that you're playing that's then creating the creature token. So this is kind of the perfect 1-drop spell that you want to include in the deck that wants to play non-creature stuff, because you get a creature that is very, very relevant in that kind of deck for just 1 mana, while also being able to trigger all of those same synergies. And then you just have 2 levels worth of extra value you can dump mana into later in the game when you have nothing better to do. That just helps you get that much more card advantage, lets you get a thing back, lets you make a board full of otters, you know, when you fire off spells later on. So there's a lot of crazy late game value just tacked onto what is otherwise just a good enough card to run in those non-creature spell prowess type decks anyway. So I think this card is actually going to be a slam dunk. We're going to have to brew that deck for sure. But next up, we have Savor. 1 black and 1 for an instant. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn, and you create a food token. This is not the greatest removal in the world. That being said, it is common, and it gives you a little bit of advantage in that it gives you a food token. So if you're in the forage deck specifically, where you can use those food tokens for way more than just life, I think this gets a little bit better. and might see play in a situation that it's not necessarily just your 22nd, 23rd card. But I think outside of that, this is your panic button removal. This is, oh no, I didn't draft enough removal, and now I'm at the end of, pack 3. You pick up a Saber, you jam it in your deck, it fills out your removal suite, and you move on with your life. But next up, we've got Raccoon Rallier. This is 1 red and 1 for a 2/2 Raccoon Bard. You can tap it, target creature you control gains haste until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. It's fine. It's filler for the Raccoon deck. The fact that it counts as a Raccoon is going to be really, really huge for Raccoon Tribal, and it's a way to just get down a relevant body on rate that's also going to give, like, basically every creature you play for the rest of the game haste, which is kind of cool, but at the cost of not doing anything else, right? Your 2-drop sits there, doesn't swing, doesn't do anything else if it's handing out haste, so it kind of slows you down in the early game, but then speeds you up significantly by adding haste to everything after that, which is kind of interesting. I think it's definitely worth experimenting with. I could see this going either way. I could see this being just not quality enough to make the cut in Raccoon decks, or I could see it being a staple that you want 2 or 3 of, because being able to jam it on 2 and then everything having haste every turn after that could be nuts. It's going to take experimenting to see which way it goes, but the potential's there. Next up, we have Crumb and Get It. 1 white for an instant. You may gift a food as you play it. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If the gift was promised, that creature also gains indestructible until end of turn. So it's a nice little combat trick. Just gives +2/+2, kills the thing it's in combat with, lets your guy survive, all that good stuff. But then it goes the extra distance where if you need to protect your guy from targeted removal, or if the +2/+2 buff isn't enough to make it survive combat, or whatever the case may be, you also have the option to just give them a thing they can use to gain life, and in return, hand out indestructible and save your dudes. So the versatility is pretty cool. I think that makes this a little bit better than most of the common tricks that we've seen, and it might make the cut in your limited deck a little more often because of that. That being said, you're not going to pick it early. It's your 22nd, 23rd card. Next up, we have Ravine Raider. 1 black for a 1/1 Lizard Rogue with a Menace, and you can pay 1 black and 1 to give it +1/+1 until end of turn. This is actually a nice little 1-drop. Lizard Tribal really wants to go wide as quick as possible, it seems, so having a 1-drop Lizard is important. The fact that it has some evasion tacked onto it is really, really nice. And then it has this upside that you can sink mana into just making it bigger, and what I like about this is it's not limited to once a turn. I'm used to seeing cards like this where you can only activate that buff once a turn, and it's depressing, but this guy doesn't have that problem, so I think in the Lizard limited deck, this is going to be a really, really important part to just start off strong, get the tempo advantage, and then start to pick up all of those crazy Lizard synergies, Lizard synergies later on in the game. Next up, we have Teapot Slinger. This is 1 red and 3 for a 3/4 Raccoon Warrior with Menace, and whenever you expend 4, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. This is just kind of a clock, right? It's a decent body as a 3/4 Menace for 4 anyway. It's going to pick up all your Raccoon synergies, but then just every time you play the stuff you want to play anyway, as long as you're not out of gas in your hand, you just get to deal 2 damage. And then you just get to deal 2 damage, and then maybe you eventually win. So, pretty cool card. I think if Raccoon Tribal is the real deal, this is going to see a lot of play in Limited in Raccoons for sure. But next up, we have Intrepid Rabbit. 1 white and 2 for a 3/2 Rabbit Soldier with Offspring 1. Whenever this creature enters, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So this is a good common way of sort of combining Rabbit Tribal and Frog Tribal, because if you can just keep bouncing this guy back to your hand and replaying it, not only can you give target creature +1/+1 until end of turn, but you can keep paying that Offspring cost to get another token copy of it, which is really, really interesting, right? For 4 mana, you get a 3/2 and a 1/1, and dish out +2/+2 worth of buff, and you can split it up. So pretty good for a common, honestly. I think it's going to be more valuable in the Rabbit deck than it looks at common. That being said, it is still just a common. It is still filler, so you're not going to pick it high. Next up, we have Valley Flamecaller. This you will pick high. This is a 3/3 Lizard Warlock for 1 red and 2. And if a lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage +1. So another batching card that cares about 4 different creature types, and I think that makes this card way, way better. You obviously slam dunk this in limited, and you try to stick to those 4 creature types as much as you can. But even outside of that, if you can stick to just like 1 or 2 of these creature types and include Valley Flamecaller as almost another tribal payoff, not necessarily something where you're trying to use all 4 of the creature types, I think it can get even a little bit better. Like in Lizard Tribal itself, this could be nuts. And that's where I think it might shine in Standard, where if you can jam this into Lizard Tribal, we've already seen a lot of really good lizards. Specifically, we saw a 2-drop Rakdos lizard that pings every time a lizard enters the battlefield and hands out counters if the opponent took damage. So this can be a really good follow-up to play to that, where turn 2 you play that guy, turn 3 you play this, that guy gets pinged, which triggers the counter, this guy gets a counter, turns into a 4/4, and you dealt an extra damage because of his ability, right? So you do 2 damage, he gets a counter, everyone's happy, and then all of your lizards from that point on just start to do really crazy stuff. So I think this is absolutely going to make the cut in some kind of a lizard aggro deck in Standard, and it's also runnable in any of those creature types as long as you're really doubling down on any of these 4 specific creature types or some combination. It's going to be really, really good in limited as well. But next up, we have Spellgyre. 2 blue and 2 for an instant, and you choose one. You either counter target spell, or you surveil 2 and then draw 2 cards. I think this card is a really good way of fitting counter magic into a limited deck. A lot of times I am trepidatious about adding counter spells to a limited deck, because if you draw them too late and your opponent's already ahead, it's really hard to actually make time to cast that spell. You don't want to hold up mana for a counter spell when you need to be playing as much as you can to the board to keep up with the opponent's board if they're ahead. So a lot of times counter spells can be really rough and limited, and it's hard to kind of build around them. You have to build around them very specifically. But this is a way where you can include a counter spell in a limited deck that maybe isn't built around allowing for counter spells, because it has this alternate mode that's card advantage that you're going to use it for most of the time. Being able to have your, draw 2 cards while also surveilling, filling up the graveyard for threshold and forage, scrying into what you need, all that good stuff, have that card advantage card in your deck for that reason. Also double as a counter spell when you're in the right circumstances, where now you're ahead on board and you just have to make sure they don't play something that messes up your board state. Well, now instead you hold on to this and you use it to counter their wrath or their big bomb or their thing that helps them catch up, and then you're really happy. So I like the versatility of this, and it'll be interesting to see just how much play it sees, but I think it has the potential. Next up, we have Heaped Harvest. 1 green and 2 for an artifact food. When it enters and when you sacrifice it, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And you can also pay 2 and sack this to gain 3 life. I think this card's a little bit deceptive because it looks like it's going to cost you a whopping 5 mana to eventually search for 2 lands. Oh, and you gain some life, in the meantime, which isn't great. But I think the way in which this card is really useful is with forage. If you're running a deck which has some really, really good forage payoffs, especially ones where you don't have to pay mana to activate the forage ability, then you can sacrifice this to the forage ability, and in doing so get to search up another basic land without having to pay the 2 mana to sack this to gain life. So in that way, this is a really good way of, for very little mana, 3 mana, basically giving you a free forage payoff and 2 lands for the 3 mana, which is nuts. So you're going to want to pick this pretty high and limited if you're in the forage deck. And if there is a forage deck in Standard, this might even make the cut there. I'm not going to say for sure because it could end up being slow, but if the forage payoffs are good enough, it is possible that something like this could just be a very, very efficient card and an efficient way to just use those forage payoffs. Next up, we have Dazzling Denial. 1 blue and 1 for an instant. You counter target spell unless its controller pays 2, and if you control a bird, you counter it unless its controller pays 4. It's nice that it's usable no matter what, but it's just really good if it's in Bird Tribal, right? I think if the Bird Tribal deck can be built in a way where you're okay with holding up mana each turn, then this card is going to go way up in value and be a much higher pick. But if you have to kind of shoehorn it in, I'm not sure. So we'll have to test it out and see how it does, but it's absolutely an option for birds. Next up we have Sonar Strike. 1 white and 1 for an instant. It deals 4 damage to target attacking, blocking, or tapped creature, and you gain 3 life if you control a bat. I think this card is way better than it looks because of all of the synergies it helps enable that are easy to overlook if you look at this card in just a vacuum, right? Gaining 3 life in Bat Tribal is going to be really important. You have a lot of synergies that can pop off, triggers that can happen by gaining that life. So being able to just incidentally gain life on your removal spell is going to be really good in that deck. In addition, 4 damage at instant speed for 2 mana is a little bit above rate than what we're used to. And you can do it to a tapped creature. It doesn't have to just be an attacking or blocking creature, which is the norm for a spell like this. You also have the ability to just do it to a tapped creature. So if they are tapping their creatures to use crazy abilities, they have a really, really good bomb as far as the ability that it has to tap and do that. You can use this to kill that creature regardless of whether it attacks or blocks. So it's a little bit better even as removal in that way. So I think when you look at everything this does, it's probably a no-brainer. This is probably one of the better pieces of common removal you can draft if you're in Bat Tribal and that life gain really matters. So you should pick it kind of high in those decks specifically. Next up we have Dire Downdraft. 1 blue and 3 for an instant. It costs 1 less to cast if it targets an attacking or tapped creature. Target creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their of their library. So this is a nice little bit of removal. It's limited removal in blue, which is obviously always going to be not that great because blue has the worst removal. But you could do a lot worse for finding ways to fit removal into blue, especially at the common rarity than a card like this. It's nice that if it targets an attacking or tapped creature, it's only 3 mana instead of 4, so you can use it, you know, as a combat trick in that way, and it's a little bit cheaper. But putting it on the top or bottom of their library, you got to remember that's always going to be a little bit better than it looks because it's basically like exiling a creature, except they don't get to, you know, interact with the card at all. It's just gone forever, right? It's in their library somewhere, whether it's the top or the bottom. So I kind of like it. Next up we have Wildfire Towl. 2 red and 1 for a sorcery. You may gift a card as you play it, and it deals 2 damage to each creature. If the gift was promised, you instead Wildfire Towl deals 1 damage to any target and 2 damage to each creature. I don't understand why they didn't word it just if the gift was promised, also deal 1 damage to any target. I guess it's important to deal that 1 damage before the other 2 damage. I'm not sure. If you think there's a reason for wording it that way, let me know in the comments because I don't know why they worded it that way. But I do think it's a pretty good card. Usually you're just going to pay this as a 3 mana Pyroclasm, right? Just sweep the board for 2 damage and hopefully kill more of their stuff than your stuff, especially if you're in like a go tall deck rather than a go wide deck. But it's nice to have that versatility where if they have a creature that has 3 toughness that absolutely needs to go away, you get to kill that too in the process of, you know, wiping out all the 2 toughness stuff just by letting them draw a card. And it has the versatility here of you getting to choose. So if you don't think it's worth it for them to draw a card to get rid of their 3 toughness creature, if you'd rather deal with that creature, then you don't have to gift them a card, right? You can let it survive. But you have the versatility here. You have the choice of, man, their 3 toughness creature is really bad. I do need to get rid of it. It's worth letting them draw a card, especially if you're cleaning up a couple other creatures with the sweep part of it in the process. So I kind of like this as a nice little, you know, limited sweeper kind of thing. Like I said, especially if you're in a go tall deck rather than a go wide deck. But next up we have Cruel Claw's Heist. 2 black mana for a sorcery. You may gift a card as you play it. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. You exile that card, but then if the gift was promised, you may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast it. This card's amazing, and it's really easy to overlook some of the ways in which it's even better than it first appears. First of all, you gift the card, and they get to draw that card before the rest of the ability resolves. So you get to see whatever card they draw off the gift when you choose what to exile from their hand. So if they happen to, you have bad luck and they happen to draw something really, really bomby, like that can be the thing that you exile and then on a later turn can play for free. So you're almost always going to get value off gifting a card because you're almost always going to grab a card out of their hand that gives you more card advantage than the one card you're letting them draw when it comes time to play that card. And the chances that they draw something random and they draw something that's really not that valuable, like a land, make gifting them a card better anyway, because you're gifting them a random card, which is never going to be as good as you getting to have card selection and pick the card out of their hand that you're going to get to play later. So you're almost always going to be able to grab something that makes more value than whatever they drew off the gift. And when you combine this with some of the ways we saw earlier in this video of being able to get value yourself when you give gifts, it gets even better. And if you're playing 𝐒𝐿DRID, you don't mind gifting them a card because you're draining them for two more life, so it gets even better than that. There's just so many ways in which this card is insane. I think it's absolutely going to be a staple card in Standard moving forward. Might even rear its head in older formats, but let me know how you feel about this card in the comments, because I'm really curious what you guys think about this one. Next up, we have Shore Up. A reprint. 1 blue for an instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn. Untap it. It's a combat trick. It can save your dude from targeted removal. It's a good card. It's going to be one of the higher picks for commons for sure. That being said, it's Shore Up. Let's move on. Next up, we have Dagger Fang Duo. This is a rat and a squirrel, a 3/2 Death Toucher for 1 black and 2, and when it enters, you may mill 2 cards. This card's fine. It's a card that can trade for anything, right? Count as a rat and a squirrel, pick up all of those tribal synergies, and then also maybe help you find what you need as far as for foraging or for threshold, or even just stuff you want in the graveyard because maybe you can play it out of the graveyard some way or bring it back. So nice little bit of extra versatility tacked on. But you could do a lot worse at the common slot where you're trying to pick this up late draft and just fill out your curve with just something for the rat deck or something for the squirrel deck that can synergize. This will get the job done and be a pretty decent death touching creature to boot, so pretty cool little common. Next up, we have Rabid Kn. 1 red and 1 for an instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is this the first time we've seen like a common or uncommon start to slide some of green's color pie removal options over to red? Having a bite spell in red seems really interesting. It's not even fight, it is bite. It is instant speed, and it buffs the creature a little bit too, which is especially good because it's a bite effect, it's not a fight, so you don't really care that you don't get the toughness buff, right? But getting that power buff is going to be substantial. I think this is going to see a lot of play in Limited. It's a really good card for any of the aggressive red decks, but I wonder if this will actually see play constructed. Hard to say for sure, but I'm really interested in knowing, is there a precedent for including bite style removal spells in red instead of green at the more common rarities? Because this definitely seems like a card that would have been in green. So if you know, let me know in the comments if there's a precedent for this, and if there was a precedent for this, is it still in standard or was it, many moons ago? Let me know. But moving on, we've got Bonebind Orer. 1 black and 1 for a 2/2 squirrel warlock bard. You can pay 1 black and 3 and exile it from your graveyard to return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I kind of love this guy. Counts as a squirrel, counts as an outlaw. It's a decently on rate 2/2 for 2, so it can trade effectively, and then it just gives you free value later. It just sits in your graveyard after it trades, and eventually when you have the 4 mana, you just get to return your best creature from your graveyard to your hand without having to spend a card. This is awesome, especially as a common, right? This is absolutely going to make the cut in your squirrel decks as your 2-drop, It's just free value later on. You don't even mind it dying and going to the graveyard because it's there to turn on Threshold and then later gets you all the value you need. So, I don't know, I love this guy. I don't think he's quite good enough for Constructed, he's too slow, but in Limited he's going to be awesome. Awesome curve filler that gives you, card advantage later on. Important card advantage that gets back your bomb that your opponent just saved their removal to take out. So, I love this card. Let me know if you agree in the comments. But next up we have Sky Skipper Duo. 1 blue and 4 for a 3/3 bird frog with flying. I think this is the last duo. It's nice that it's a bird and a frog, can fit into both of those tribal synergies. 5 mana for a 3/4 flyer is a bit much though. But it also has, whenever it enters, you exile up to 1 other target creature you control, and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And the bird deck, possibly the bird deck, but definitely the frog deck, wants to flicker things. It wants things to enter the battlefield, exile and re-enter the battlefield to trigger ETBs and stuff like that. It has a lot of its mechanics and a lot of its synergies built into the idea of creatures re-entering play. So being able to do that with a common and also give you a 3/3 flying body, that seems really good for 5 mana. That absolutely seems worth it. I mean, you would normally play a flicker spell for 2 mana and a 3/3 flyer for 3 mana, and both of those spells would be fine. So the fact that you get both together for the same amount of mana, but it only costs you 1 card instead of 2, I think makes this card go way up in value. It's still not going to be something you want to have too many in your deck, but 1 at the top end for a deck that has a lot of really good ETB payoffs seems like it would be a really good idea. So I like this as a common. I'll probably be jamming 1 for sure. And that brings us to our last card of the day, and one of my favorite cards in the set. This card is bonkers. This is Essence Channeler. 1 white and 1 for a 2/1 Bat Cleric. As long as you've lost life this turn, it gets flying and vigilance. Whenever you gain life, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and whenever it dies, you put its counters on target creature you control. So wait, it's basically an Ajani's Pridemate. It's a 2 mana 2/1 that gets a counter every time you gain life. It's not limited to once a turn or any of that, but then it also gets to distribute its counters when it dies. That alone is crazy. That alone is like a Pridemate style creature amped up to 11. But on top of that, if you find a way to lose life on your turn, it gets flying and vigilance, which means it swings in evasively for a ton of damage that's hard to block, and then is still available to block so your opponent can't crack back next turn. This guy is going to be an absolute threat in Standard, in Limited, in everything it's played in. Well, maybe not older formats. It's hard to say with some of the older formats because they're so powerful. But in Standard, this guy is going to be nuts. I am absolutely brewing Life Gain as one of the first decks that I brew in Early Access. It's going to be bonkers, and it's really, really easy to turn on the Flying and Vigilance when you realize you can just play Pain Lands, right? Have enough Pain Lands in your deck so that you consistently have at least 1, and you have the ability to just pay a life at any time to generate a mana, turn it on every single turn, get all of your lost life payoffs very easily every single turn without having to spend mana, and you're also mana fixing in the process. So Pain Lands are going to be awesome. This deck is going to be awesome. Life Gain is going to be awesome. I am so excited for Bloomburrow Early Access. Make sure you join me. But that's going to do it for the day. So Early Access is Wednesday, July 24th, 24-hour stream. Twitch.tv/QuarantinedCapricorn, because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming. I might not be alive after 24 hours, but I'm going to do my best, damn it. I'm going to need a really big pot of Nectar of the Gods for that one. So I hope you'll join me. Deck techs will start dropping on the channel for Standard decks that same day. The first one's going to go up. Huge shout out to my mod Finn for being kind enough to help with some of that editing so that I can be in the middle of my stream and we can still have a deck tech pop up on YouTube. So on that day, July 24th, our first Standard deck tech's going to go live, and every single day after that for the next week and a half, 2 weeks, there's going to be a new deck popping every single day, most of which will be from Early Access, but then of course when the set launches proper, we'll be diving in as well, and we'll be building even more decks. So lots of crazy deck techs on the way. Look forward to those. But spoiler season, even though it's the grand finale, it's not 100% over. We've got the special guest cards, which I'm going to do a video for, and we've got the commander cards, which I haven't even touched on yet, and I'm going to do one big video that has all of the commander cards. So those 2 videos are coming, the deck techs are coming, early access is coming. What a time to be alive. I hope you'll be there with me to experience it all, because it's going to be wild. Make sure you like the video if you haven't already. So you guys liking the video, that's helping this channel to grow, helping this video to get out to more people. And I appreciate it, because it is a lot of work, and it means a lot to me. Subscribe so you never miss an upload, because all that crazy content I just told you about is on the way. I am so excited. I hope you're excited as I am. I'll see you there. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck techs, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.